project's been running for just over 26 years now. It is a partnership project, so it was initiated after years of low flow in the 1990s, particularly on Misbourne and the River Chess. And it was a way to try and bring together the major players to try and tackle some of the problems that these rivers are facing. It's led by the Chilterns Conservation Board, but you can see the list of logos. It includes the water companies, the environment agencies, and other local voluntary groups, as well as Bucks Council. We deliver quite a range of work as part of the project. So education is one strand of what we do, and we try to deliver education in the broader sense. So we have various programs that are looking more at working with community groups and public engagement and events, as well as our school education program. We're quite involved in access and rights of way on the different walks and trying to promote people visiting the rivers and learning more about the rivers through direct contact. We provide an advisory service to landowners who have the rivers that flow through their land, and also to people that are managing land in the river catchments where that land management is having an impact. And we deliver various river restoration and conservation projects on the 9 different rivers that we work on. I just wanted to sort of let you know who we were, because we possibly haven't heard of the project before. A lot of the education work that we actually deliver on the ground is primary based, but quite a few of our resources are secondary based. We're not delivering a lot of secondary field work because we're very aware that there's already quite a lot of fieldwork taking place, and lots of schools are quite confident and capable of leading fieldwork activities themselves. And there's also a Field Studies Council centre based in the Chilterns that's delivering fieldwork as part of their charitable aims. So we're not doing lots of work on secondary fieldwork delivery. We are trying to produce good resources to support the work that you're all doing. And we're also interested in providing things that you need and that other providers perhaps aren't doing. So we are offering we're delivering bespoke things in some secondary schools and colleges. So yeah, again, it's kind of speak to us about what you need and what you're not able to access in other ways, because we can provide speakers, we can provide other workshops if that's something that you need. Thank you. And the other thing I just wanted to flag up, Kate will mainly be speaking this evening about the education resources and the learning section of our website, but there is an awful lot of other relevant information on the website. So our website is chilternstreams.org, and although there are particular things we flagged as learning resources in the learning section, there are other things that might be useful as secondary information for work that you're doing. So particularly work on some of the threats that the chalk streams face and some of the pressures that they're under in the chalk streams in crisis section, and also in the Our Work section of the website. We try to keep up to date case studies of projects that we're delivering. So if you are interested in case studies of river restoration or other activities that are going on to improve these rivers, then that section is worth a look as well. So I just would, if you're able to and if you have time, encourage you to have a look at the wider website beyond the learning section. I won't talk any more about the background because I think everyone's interested in the education side and the learning resources that we have. So I'll hand over to Kate now to talk you through that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Really happy for people to interrupt me as I work through these slides. So please do ask questions and turn on your microphone if you want to ask a question. I think probably better to do that than wait till the very end, or put a question in the chat if you want, because Kerry will pick up on those and hopefully then stop me in my flow as well and we'll get your questions answered. So we're going to kind of split this up into 2 parts. We're going to start with me giving you an introduction to chalk streams in a wider sense and the importance of chalk streams, and then move on to have a break and then move on to the kind of material that we've developed and put on the web to help you teaching about different aspects of chalk streams, and with a kind of focus on geography, on biological science, and on sort of linking those as well within the curriculum. So again, do ask questions at all points when I'm talking, but I'm going to just start off with these two photographs, both of the River Chess, and one is a lovely photograph on the left-hand side showing the River Chess as we hope it looks most of the time. You can see some of the important characteristics of a chalk stream in this photograph. For example, you should be able to see under the water the submerged plant. That's ranunculus. which is a long trailing aquatic plant, which is really characteristic of chalk stream environments. It's one thing that makes these chalk streams so special are the plants that grow in these rivers. And you can just about see the white flowers on top of the water there, which are part of the ranunculus. So chalk streams generally are characterized by clear water, and that's because they're groundwater fed systems. And we'll go into a little bit about how the systems are fed by groundwater and what that means and the types of characteristics it gives these streams. But one thing to think about is the kind of high ecological status of these rivers as a result. They're very productive systems. They have lots of plants growing in them and around them, lots of fish and invertebrate species as well. Now, unfortunately, a lot of our chalk streams are not in good ecological status, as you'll see further on in this presentation. And often we see the River Chess like it is on the right-hand side. So this is where we've had an extended period of rainfall, which has washed fine sediment, so clay material and silty material from the road systems, from the fields surrounding the Chess into the river, and the river has become what I would call turbid or very cloudy. So when we started working on the Chess, we were very interested in sources of pollution to the Chess. And this is one example of a photograph where the river is receiving lots of urban runoff, lots of road runoff. And that's turned the water from the sort of clear, transparent water you see on the left-hand side to very cloudy on the right. So again, that's an aspect I'll be talking about as we move through the slides. So what are we aiming to do with this workshop? We'd like to introduce you to some of the challenges that are faced by river managers in the changing world. So we have a team at the Chiltern Chalk Streams Project who are out there looking after the rivers in the Chilterns and are coming up against sort of daily challenges in terms of the river water quality. So the quality of the water, the chemistry of the water, and quantity, so the flows in the river as well. So when I'm talking about water quantity, I'm talking about the amount of flow in the river and the timing of that flow. When I'm talking about water quality, I'm talking about the chemicals in the river system, and that includes things like fine sediment moving through the river as well. We want to provide you with some material to enable you to teach about the water cycle and water management from a kind of chalk streams perspective. So I'll take you through some of that material, introduce you to the educational resources that we have on the website, and signpost to you some potential learning activities. And I'm really interested in your feedback as well as I'm going through things. If there are questions you want to ask about learning material or make suggestions as to what we could make available or improve, we'd be really interested in hearing from you. So please don't hold back in terms of your comments. One thing we'll focus on a little bit in the second half of the talk is inquiry-based learning material. And we think good inquiry-based learning has 4 different characteristics that are really important. So one is that the learning is driven by questions. It encourages students to have a questioning attitude towards knowledge. So what we've provided is some what we call stimulus material. Material are just talking points for students to have a look at and think about questions that arise from the material we provided. We've based it around the geography curriculum. So it's the material is a kind of blend of human geography and physical geography. So some things are about issues associated with the river, and others are more, we've got more material that's also sort of mathematically based, opportunities to do statistical analysis on data, for example, as well. And good inquiry-based learning means that students are making sense of the information for themselves to develop their understanding. So we've created some story maps, some material that students can use to explore issues on the River Chess as well, and they can reflect on their learning. So those are the elements we would consider to be good inquiry-based learning characteristics. So I wanted to start with a couple of diagrams for you, and I've tried to source diagrams from websites that would be easily accessible. So for example, here we have a water cycle as drawn by Affinity Water. So this is a local water company that operate in the Chess catchment. And you can see here, we've got a kind of traditional natural water cycle diagram on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the water treatment cycle as a water company might see it, and something that I find is sort of less understood when we talk about rivers, because we often focus in hydrology on the natural water cycle. So just running through that natural water cycle for the starting point, we've got obviously water evaporating from open water bodies, so evaporating from the sea, from river water surfaces and from lakes. So water evaporating into the atmosphere, and also transpiring from the leaves of plants, from trees, etc. That's all moving water into the atmosphere, and then that water falls as rain or sleet, snow or hail onto the ground, and then makes its way back into our river systems and back out into the sea. Now, in terms of thinking about chalk streams and other types of catchments across the UK, one of the critical characteristics is how permeable the soils and the rocks are on the land. So in a catchment like the Chesses catchment, which is underlain by chalk, the soils that have developed above that chalk are quite permeable. It's very easy for water to move through those soils. So when it rains on the soil surface, a good proportion of that water moves down through the soil, down into the permeable rock and into the aquifer, and then makes its way back up into the river again from the ground. And we can contrast that with a catchment that might be more clay soil, for example, where a lot of the water won't be able to permeate through into the soil or infiltrate into the soil, and will actually travel across the surface, the land surface, into the river. So there's some, even around, closer areas to us around London, there's quite a difference in the hydrology of different catchments depending on the soil type. So as a student, looking at the soil type and relating that to the hydrological cycle is really quite important. On the right, we have the water treatment cycle. And all of our rivers in the UK have had lots of human activity. The Chess is no exception to that. There is a sewage treatment works at the upper end of the Chess, just downstream of Chesham, that has a sewage treatment works of 38,000 population equivalent, which means it's a large sewage treatment works. And at times, in summer drought conditions, the water from that sewage treatment works can be 80% of the flow through the Chess. So the Chess is highly modified in terms of the amount of treated effluent that's moving through it. It's quite an extreme weather river from that perspective. There's not that many other rivers in the country that have this proportion of treated effluent moving through them. It's at the sort of upper end. But when you look at rivers around the country, most of them will have sewage treatment works on them. And part of the sort of water treatment cycle will be occurring within the catchment. So we can look at this from two perspectives. We can start with the fact that in some river systems, and not in the Chess, not in chalk streams, there's abstraction actually from the river itself. So for example, in the Thames, downstream of the Chess, you'd see abstraction points where water is taken from the river for drinking water supply. In the Chess catchment, we have abstraction from aquifers. So the water's being abstracted from the rock underneath our feet in the river Chess catchment from the chalk. That water makes its way to a drinking water treatment plant and then is provided to our homes for our domestic drinking water supply. And those of you who know the Chess well will know that there's, for example, a drinking water production site down at Chorleywood, near Chorleywood House Estate. So you can see that if you were thinking about the water cycle, we use that water in our homes, and the water then goes down to our drains and to a sewage treatment works. And then it flows back when it's been treated into the river system. So within the River Chess, we have two sewage treatment works, one just downstream of Chesham at the top end of the river, and then there's one in the middle section of the river at Cheneys as well, which is much smaller than the sewage treatment works at Chesham. So this water treatment cycle is really important for our UK rivers, and important for students to understand the importance of that water treatment cycle. Are there any questions about this so far that anyone wants to pose? So I mentioned groundwater earlier on. So really important to understand these types of groundwater flows. And I like to think about them as big sort of loops of water underground. So this diagram bottom right shows you these pathways of water. Essentially, you've got rain falling on the soil surface. That rain moves down through the soil, infiltrates through the soil surface, and then permeates down into the aquifer. And then it goes in a big loop back up to surface water again and up to the river system. And groundwater flows, they occur throughout the landscapes, from mountain ranges through to the oceans. And you can think of them as nested loops of water flows, all with different travel times. So, for example, if the water infiltrates very close to the river system, it might take days for water to move through the shallow soil into the river. If it's a bit further back from the river system, it might take weeks to months to move down into the groundwater and then back out into the river. And then these loops get progressively bigger and bigger the deeper the water actually moves. So flow pathways can be tens of meters in length to tens of miles in length. So that means they have different travel times, days to millennia. So in the chess, in terms of the groundwater contribution to the flow, we know that on average, that's taken 50 years to go from the soil surface down into the ground, into the aquifer, and then back up into the river again. So that what we would call the residence time of water is 50 years. And that's just an average, because in reality, there are lots of these different loops going on of different lengths and different travel times. But really important when we think about water chemistry, because it means what we see in the river today may have been applied to the land about 50 years ago, for example. So the nitrate that we see in the river, the nitrate concentrations, reflect what we were doing in terms of farming practice about 50 years ago, on average. So you change that farming practice and change those activities on the land surface, it may take quite a while for you to see an effect in the river system. Okay, is there any questions that anyone wants to ask in relation to that? Because that's quite an important concept for groundwater fed rivers such as the Chess.
Sorry, Kate, there's one question that came up just based on the last slide, asking, does the involvement of treatment works affect water quality in the river itself?
Yes, so it does. So the water, as you know, the sewage is treated. So it's treated effluent that is entering the river system, but it does have a higher concentration of dissolved chemicals in it. So what I'll show you later on a thing called electrical conductivity, which measures the total electrical signal from the water. And that is generally higher downstream of the sewage treatment works compared to upstream, because there are more chemicals. For example, there'd be more salt, slightly more salt in the river system. Also temperature. So on average, a sewage treatment works can increase temperature in a river by 1 degree. So we'll see in the Chess again, there is downstream differences in temperature arising from the sewage treatment works. And that's on the size of the Chesham sewage treatment works, for example. So with a population of sort of tens of thousands of people contributing to that sewage treatment works. Okay, so we've talked a bit about groundwater. There are lots of different aquifer types in the UK. An aquifer is basically a permeable rock that stores groundwater, and it allows water to flow readily into a borehole or a well. Now, these rocks themselves have to have quite high porosity, so lots of pore space in them, which is filled with water. So the pores are big enough to collect water within them, but the pores also have to be well connected so that water can actually flow through the aquifer. And chalk's quite interesting, because the reason that it's a good rock to draw water from is actually because of all the cracks and the fissures in it, as opposed to it storing the water in the matrix of the chalk. So sometimes the water that's stored within the chalk matrix is disconnected from the rest of the water supply. And it's actually that when you pump a borehole from the aquifer, you're pulling water from all the small fractures and cracks within the rock. So we call it a dual porosity, i.e. a two porosity system. It has these fractures and these fissures where you can actually get quite rapid water movement. And then you have the rest of the chalk matrix, which actually is quite slow water moving. And makes it quite difficult to predict where the water's coming from within the aquifer, because it's all about where these fractures and fissures actually move within the rock. Most groundwater circulates in the upper 100 to 200 meters from the surface of the saturated zone. So essentially, you've got groundwater sort of from the soil to 100 to 200 meters depth in these aquifers. And the aquifers that we have in the UK, the main ones are chalk, there's Permo-Triassic sandstone, which is that sort of lighter orange color on that map. There's the brown color, which is our sort of carboniferous and older cover. But there's also Jurassic limestone and lower green sand as well, which actually, when you see it, is proper bright green sand. It's quite impressive when you dig that up. And we're in the chalk area, so we're to the north there of the London Basin in this area of green chalk. So groundwater is really important for public water supply in England and Wales. It supplies 30% of our public water supply. That's 6,064 megalitres each day, and that's enough to run a dishwasher 400 million times every day. So that's a lot of water that we use. It's a really critical supply of water for our domestic use, for agriculture, and for industry as well. And I've put this map on the right here as well, because that shows you the different aquifers in the UK and how productive they are, i.e. how water-bearing they are, how efficient they are at bearing water for public water drinking supply. And you can see this dark blue band here. The chalk is really highly productive. We use it for domestic water supply. So in the Chess catchment, for example, all our water is coming from the aquifer in the area, unless it's pumped in from external. And the water companies recently have been shutting down abstraction within the Chess catchment and starting to draw water from areas external to the catchment. But up until that's only been happening in the last few years. So previously we were drawing water from around Chesham, from the aquifer below Chesham, and from around the Chorley Wood area for our drinking water supply. I just wanted to show you a few diagrams that nicely illustrate what happens when we pump water from a borehole, if that borehole is close to a river system. Because it makes us think about the effect of the drinking water supply potentially on the river system. So the top 1A here shows you the land surface, the top of the groundwater, that's the water table on that diagram. And you can see these arrows showing you the travel, the flow of the water. So essentially you've got arrows moving down through the soil to the aquifer, hitting what's called a confining bed. So that will be a layer of the aquifer that's less permeable, might be clayey, for example, rather than chalk. So the water can't move through that. So it starts to move sideways and then moves through into the stream. Kerry, can you see my cursor, by the way, on this? Yeah. Okay, cool. So basically your water is moving firstly vertically and then laterally into the stream. Now, if you put a borehole in a floodplain area or on the lower slopes of a hill slope, and that would be a common thing to do because you want the water table to be fairly close to the surface. You are going to start pumping water out of this borehole and you change these flow lines. So you start to move the flow lines to the borehole and you create what's called a water divide here, where some of the water is going to the stream, but it may be that some of the water is actually going to your borehole instead of the stream. And so under this kind of scenario, we're taking water for public drinking water supply, and perhaps it's not reaching the stream. And this is why we see examples of what we would call over abstraction in some of our catchments, where we're taking lots of water at the expense of the actual river system, which the flows in the river system then start to reduce. If we pump extensively from that borehole that's near the stream, then eventually we may actually be creating lines of transmission straight from that river. So even the river water is then moving into the borehole. This is obviously something that the water companies don't want, because if they do this, then the quality of that water isn't going to be as good. So they want to be collecting water from the aquifer because it's much cleaner. The action of that water moving through the soil has cleaned it and removed some of the contaminants from it. there any questions in relation to that, Kerry, that are appearing in the chat at all? Good. If anyone wants to ask, just yeah, far away if there's any questions. Okay, so what's so important about chalk streams? These are groundwater fed rivers. There's greater than 200 of them in England. And the water in these groundwater fed rivers is predominantly from these chalk aquifers. So it has the characteristics of the chalk, because that chalk, as the waters move through the chalk, it's picked up lots of chemicals. So for example, chalk is made of calcium and magnesium carbonate. So there's lots of calcium and magnesium in this water. It's rich in those solutes, and those are micronutrients for these plants. They're part of the reason why there's such prolific growth of plants in these river systems, because they're using the calcium, using the magnesium, using some of these solutes for plant growth. Because that water's been filtered as it's moved through the soil, and it comes out of that groundwater out of the chalk quite clear. So that's why the water that you see flowing in groundwater-fed rivers is very clear and not very turbid, because it's coming up through springs in the ground into that river system and coming up through the riverbed as well. So we get what's clear alkaline, because it's got lots of calcium and magnesium carbonate in it, and lots of minerals from the rock, so mineral-rich water. And this leads to it being an ecologically rich, a highly biodiverse system with lots of in-stream plants, supporting fish like trout that you can see bottom right. And Kerry, I suspect this is a picture from your Trout in the Classroom initiative. And mammals like water vole. Water voles love this type of habitat that you can see on the left here with the reeds. That's a lovely habitat for a water vole to live in, to get its food from, and to create its nests in as well. And these are internationally important river systems. England has 85% of the world's chalk streams. There's also chalk in France, and there's chalk in Denmark as well. So there are Danish chalk streams and French chalk streams, but we have the lion's share of them. And so they're iconic systems. And often when people think about spending time by rivers, they're thinking about clear water systems with lots of plants and these types of animals in the system. So where are they? Well, you've already probably guessed that they're obviously in this area of chalk to the north and to the south of London. It runs from, actually there's chalk streams up in Yorkshire, and then there's lots in East Anglia and in a band moving just to the north of London and across down to Dorset as well, and down to the River Piddle, which I love the name of, and the River Frome as well down here in the southwest here. Now this diagram on the right, though, is color-coded to show you the ecological status of these different chalk streams. And you can see a lot of them here are red and orange rather than green. And this means, unfortunately, they are not at what we would call good ecological status. So the good ecological status streams are in green, moderate is orange, and bad to poor are the red color here. And the Environment Agency, who are the regulators of our rivers in the UK, do this ecological status analysis every 5 years. And they look at all of the data that they have on these rivers. And they look at their chemical status and their ecological status, and then they grade them overall. And this is the grading that they get as part of what we call the Water Framework Directive. So you can see that there is quite a problem in terms of ecological status with many of our chalk streams, and those in the Chilterns, including the Chess, are red and orange on this map and are not at good ecological status. And I'll take you through some of the reasons for that in a moment. This is an image from Affinity Water's website with their pictorial schematic of a hydrological cycle in a chalk catchment. And you can see here they have their water pumping station. They explain that water is being pumped from the aquifer to be treated. They talk about infiltration, so water falling in onto the land, soaking into the soil, moving down into the aquifer, whereby it's either going through the soil and then into the aquifer, or it's also then being taken up by plant roots to be transpired back out into the atmosphere again. The thing that I don't like about this diagram that it doesn't show the relationship between this river and the chalk aquifer. It doesn't show you that the water table should be at a height that's equal to the bed of the river system. These rivers flow when the water table is above the height of the bed of the river because they're being fed from the groundwater. And this diagram rather disconnects the river from the chalk aquifer. So just be careful when you're choosing your different diagrams out there in the environment and thinking about chalk streams. The best diagrams link and really clearly show that link between where the groundwater is and where the river is as well. So we have developed some of those kind of plots for our story map that I'll show you later on. I just wanted to show you some hydrological data for chalk stream for the Chess, just to give you an idea of the difference between a river on chalk and a river on clay, which I mentioned earlier on. So these are plots that you can download from the National River Flow Archive, which is all online. And for all rivers in the UK, you can take this data. It's Environment Agency gauging data, and you can download these types of graphs. So this is, I've just chosen a graph for the Chess on the left and a graph for the River Lee on the right. And this happens to be the 2016, but you can choose whatever year you want. You've got month on the bottom on the x-axis, and you've got flow in cumex on the y-axis here. So that's, you might call that discharge rather than flow. And so you've got a line, that black line just shows you the flow at different times of the year, and this is through 2016. And we can compare that to a nearby river, the River Lee in North London, which has a clay catchment. And I'm sure you can see here that the Chess hydrograph is much more subdued, far less noisy, far less peaky than the Lee. And that's because the Lee is, as I said, it's clay. That clay is not permeable. So the water that flows onto that catchment, when it rains, it tends to flow across the surface. It can't infiltrate through the soil. And so we get really rapid runoff from the catchment surfaces into the River Lee. Whereas on the Chess, we've got this subdued hydrograph, much more stable, because that movement of water into the groundwater is buffering that river system. It takes time for the water to get into the river. Now, you'll always see those some rapid water movement. So when it rains in the Chess, as you've probably, if any of you are, I think quite a few of you here may well be quite local, you see the roads running with water, for example, and they're fairly well connected in some places to the Chess. So you're always going to get some water moving into the river quite immediately in an urban setting. But a large proportion of water falling on the catchment is actually moving down into the chalk before it reaches the river. Are there more questions in the chat, Kerry, that I need to?
So no, nothing's popped up at the moment. No, I have just shared the website for the data.
Perfect. Yeah. Does anyone want to ask any questions about that? I think it's a nice sort of visual look at the hydrographs associated with different soil types. Okay, so the National River Flow Archive can show you lots of different hydrological information from the UK, and I think it's a really useful resource to explore. So I'm going to try and explore that with you now and just show you if my screen share will move out of the way. Should see the UK Water Resources portal now. So this is the homepage when you first head in there, and you can just zoom in on any river that you would like. So we can try and zoom in on the Chess. We can have a look here, rivers like the Gade, for example, and here we go down to the river flow station, the Chess at Rickmansworth. You just click on the Chess on the gauging station, and then on the right will pop up the actual flow for the Chess, including some very recent information. So this has been updated as of January the 20th here. You can see 2024, so a couple of days ago. I suspect that hydrograph will be rising after last night's rain. And it gives you some really nice banding for the river. So this is from a gauging station that measures discharge down at Rickmansworth. which is run by the Environment Agency. And you can see this different banding tells you how the flow is at the moment in relation to long-term records. So if the flow is up in the blue, for example, that means it's above normal or notably high or exceptionally high. If it's in the down into the red, we're in years where the flow is below normal or notably low or exceptionally low. So you can change the number of years you're viewing the data over just by clicking on this number of years thing. And for example, here for the Chess, you can see that in 2020, 2021, we had exceptionally high to notably high flows within the River Chess. So groundwater levels were very high and flows in the river were very high as a result. So this is a really nice resource that you can use with students, and you can very easily click on these icons to download plots as PNGs. You can explore different forms of the graph as well and download the data. So nice site to have a look at and use further. Okay. So that's the site that I think Kerry's put in the chat for you so that you can access that afterwards. So there's lots of pressures on chalk streams. The flows and the water quality are under increasing pressure from abstraction for drinking water purposes. Although, as I've said recently, the water companies have stopped abstracting for drinking water in the area and increasingly are taking supplies from elsewhere and moving them into the catchment. So we have one borehole that's still active, but there are others that have been temporarily shut down. So that's starting to be addressed in the Chess. Got agricultural activities, so there's agricultural runoff that causes issues for the river as well. Urban runoff, lots of road runoff, for example, during the kind of weather that we've seen over the last few days. And sewage inputs as well to the river system. So not just treated effluent, but untreated effluent as well, when either there's been high intensity rainfall or when groundwater levels are particularly high in the River Chess. So it reflects a lot of the issues that we're seeing and hearing about more widely across the UK. Just got a little table here, and you can download this from our 25-year report, the Chiltern Chalk Streams project. But this just shows us the state of different streams in the Chilterns. And you can see that the Chess here is moderate ecological status. You can see that all rivers failed for chemicals. And that's similar to most rivers in the UK because of what we call these very long-lasting chemicals. You might have heard them being called forever chemicals. Chemicals that don't degrade, organic pollutants like brominated flame retardants, for example, PBDEs, and the other chemicals, these PFOS, are fluorinated compounds as well that we use around the home as well. These types of chemicals, unfortunately, made their way into our rivers for various different reasons, and are the reasons why a lot of our rivers fail for chemical status. And our chalk streams are no different from a lot of the other rivers in the UK for that reason. So yes, so the Chess is not a bad ecological status. In fact, it's one of the better ones in the Chilterns area, but it does have a problem with phosphate. And the sewage treatment works at Chesham at the moment is putting in what's called phosphorus stripping to try and remove the phosphorus, because the phosphorus levels in the Chess at the moment are quite high. Oh, are there more questions in the chat? I think I've seen
there's just
a few
one that's
more
popped up, just trying to understand the relationship between groundwater flow and runoff. So question, you said earlier that residence time is 50 years, but the Chess obviously reacts to recent rainfall in terms of greater discharge, obviously, if you see the river after a storm. So the discharge is a combination of both then?
Yes, it is. And so you've got a lot of paved areas around Chesham, for example, lots of streets. So the water from those, from falling on those roads, is entering the river quite rapidly. Also, you'll have water entering the river that's just going through the soils, so through the shallow soils, and then moving into the river as well. So you do see that reflected in the river. And also the river does run parallel to quite a few roads between around the Cheneys area, for example, and we know that there's quite a lot of road runoff as well entering the river in those sections. So you do, as you say, see this rapid response, but as well as the sort of groundwater signature as well from the groundwater in the river. Is there anything else, Kerry, that you? Okay, great. So why are so many chalk streams not at good ecological status? So one thing is flows, low flows, low water availability because of public water supply, high levels of water demand in our area, and high levels of planned housing growth. And I'll show you some figures later on in the second half of the talk, talking about high levels of water demand in the area compared to the rest of the country, because we're not very good at conserving water in the Chilterns, unfortunately. Water quality as well is important. So we see a siltation of gravel. So we see this fine sediment getting into the river system, clogging up the riverbed, infilling those gravels, and that can lead to low oxygen levels, for example, in the river. We've got high nitrate and phosphate concentrations as well, and I've talked about that nitrate issue. Nitrate gets into rivers from a combination of agricultural activity, so runoff, but also from sewage treatment works as well. So there is quite a high proportion of nitrate getting into the River Chess from the sewage treatment works at Chesham. And as I've said at the moment, high concentrations of phosphorus from that sewage treatment works as well, although they have phosphorus stripping going in at that sewage treatment works. So hopefully that situation will change fairly soon. Sewage discharge and untreated sewage discharge is also an issue for a lot of chalk streams. And of course, the consequences there are poor invertebrates and fish communities, where all of these impacts are happening, this combination of low flows and water quality, poor water quality. And that's often referred to as chalk stream malaise, when we don't know exactly the reason why the chalk streams are not reaching good ecological status, but we know there's a combination of factors. And just a reminder of what we're looking for in a good aquatic ecosystem, a good chalk system. We're looking for this combination of the fish species, the trout, kind of iconic fish species, the high invertebrate life, lots of plants, both on the bank and in the river as well. Plants that actually need to be rooted in gravel. If this riverbed was just fine sediment, these plants wouldn't be existing in the way that they are in this photograph, because they would be uprooted by any higher flows and washed down the river system. So they need gravel to get their roots around, to embed themselves and successfully stay in that river system. And what's really important is that link between these plants, the insects and the fish. So for example, without those long trailing stands of ranunculus you can see in the photo, you wouldn't have all the invertebrates living on those leaves of the ranunculus, taking shelter in those areas. You wouldn't have good fish refugia, for example, so for young fish to develop. You need these sort of side areas where you have these emergent, what I'd call emergent plants, where young fish can take refuge as well. So all of these sort of characteristics are really important for a healthy chalk ecosystem. So a bit of quiz for you here. Can you tell us what all of these species are and which is the odd one out? Don't think we can give a prize over the web, but it would be great to hear from you if you know which one is the odd one out and why, and can you name these different species? Or do put anything in the chat if you want to. Odd one out in the chat would be good if anyone knows what it is and why.
Yeah, we are getting a few things popping up in the chat. So we've had water vole and brown trout successfully identified.
Perfect.
And a suggestion that the crayfish on the right hand side is the odd one out.
Yeah, and why?
We haven't had a why.
It is though. When I first saw one of these in the River Chess, I thought it was someone had thrown a lobster in. They are quite large. But this is the invasive signal crayfish, and it's an invasive species, and that's why it's the odd one out in this photo. It really shouldn't be in the river. But we know we have them in large quantities. We see them on the riverbed. We're taking a walk around during the day. They're actually nocturnal, so you probably see an awful lot more if you went out to the river at night. They burrow into the riverbanks, and unfortunately, they cause the riverbanks to start to decay away and recede as well. So they're actually causing quite a lot of problems on the Chess. And then the middle is the watercress.
We did get watercress. Emma jumped in with watercress. I have to say, James won one surprise for invasive American signal crayfish.
Way, well done. Brilliant. Okay. Do you know about winterborne sections of a chalk stream? This plot here is trying to explain what happens to chalk streams in their upper reaches in relation to the level of groundwater. So the top plot to the left is when the water table is quite high, so groundwater levels are quite high, and so that groundwater intersects the soil surface quite high up the valley. So if you imagine there, when your water table intersects that surface of the soil, you get springs appearing. So that's where you've got the river, the topmost headwater of the river appear. As that water table drops over time, so it's rising and falling throughout the year, as it drops, then that point at which the water table intersects the slope here drops further down the valley. And so your river appears further downstream. So chalk streams migrate, their headwaters migrate up and down valleys in response to the rising and falling groundwater. So some years, though, you will see areas of the riverbed at the top of the river in the headwaters that aren't flowing. So these photographs on the right here show a dry riverbed. This is in Chesham itself. And during a drought year, when the headwaters have really moved quite far down the valley. So it's a natural phenomenon, but the question is also to what extent are we making this worse by abstracting the groundwater? So actually, these types of chalk streams are highly valued ecologically for these winterborne sections when they occur naturally. So some of these sections should dry out during years when there's low water table. And they have specialist species that live in these areas. So it's not that this movement is a bad thing per se. It becomes problematic when you have far more lower groundwater years because of abstraction, over abstraction, and lower flows within the river because of over abstraction. So you will see around the country in chalky areas, many places called winterborne something or born something, and it's indicative of springs and winterborne sections of these chalk streams. Very happy to go through that again, Kerry, if there's any questions in the chat about that. You've seen this data set before, but this is just going from 2020 to 2024. You can see, for example, here in 2022, we had a period of time when the river flows were lower than average, and then you will have seen the riverbed drying up in the upper reaches of Chesham, for example, in the winterborne sections of the River Chess. So flows can be quite changeable quite naturally in chalk streams. In terms of human disruption, and just a summary of the types of issues we associate now with these chalk streams and problems: abstraction for drinking water, road runoff I've explained, just channelization of the river, concreting in of the river sections where you can't get the kind of plant growth that you might have had in the past, and you're straightening the river channel. Runoff from agriculture, carrying with it sediments and pesticides and fertilizers. Domestic water use, so abstraction for domestic water use, and plastic litter is obviously an emerging issue that a lot of people are becoming more aware of as well, which is a particular problem downstream of sewage treatment works as well. Okay, should we take a break? And then after the break, I'll take you through all the learning material that we've created for the chess, and we can explore a few of the resources that are online. If there are any questions you want answered, just pop them into the chat and I'll try and address those when we come back. But if we take a break, then come back at 5:05. Hopefully that will work. Are you happy for me to make a start? Great. Just before the break, I think Sean put a question into the chat to ask about understanding when raw sewage might be entering the River Chess. Thames Water have a map of what they call their event duration monitors, which basically is a map that informs you when sewage treatment works is discharging from storm tanks. So, for example, we can click on the Chesham sewage treatment works now, and you can see that the monitor indicates that storm flow is currently discharging into the River Chess. So this means there could be sewage in this section of the watercourse. So that's the best resource, Sean, that I know of to understand whether raw sewage is entering the River Chess. So I'll go back to our slides now. So we've put together some resources for teaching 16 plus for human geography, physical geography, for biology, and for environmental scientists as well. And I'm just going to take you through some of those resources at the moment. Kerry, I think you were going to talk about the first 3 of these resources and just tell people what they are and how they came about.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick mention, because the first 3 were produced by the project without the involvement of the university. As I said at the beginning, the sense we have from speaking to secondary teachers in the area is there's not a huge demand for us to lead fieldwork visits, because either you're doing it yourselves or, as I said, there's a Field Studies Council centre locally who specialise in that. So we've focused on trying to produce some really high quality resources that people can use to support their learning. The first 3 tabs on this page, and so this is a screenshot from our website, are 3 films that we commissioned. So the first one is a general introduction. It covers a lot of the information that Kate has given you about the characteristics of a chalk stream, about what makes them special, and about some of the wildlife associated with them. The second one is an animation, and it's actually, I was amazed to find out it's one of the most visited pages on our website. So I don't know whether that's all teachers or whether there's just a lot of people out there with questions, but it's an animation explaining how chalk stream works, the relationship between the aquifer and the river, and particularly that winterborne cycle, so how the flow varies through the year. But as I say, that's been very well watched. So we have these on our education pages, but we also have it as a general kind of information resource on the website as well. And both of those films are around about 3 minutes long. They're not particularly, well, they're not specifically targeted at any secondary age group, but they're there as general interest. But I think that they would be relevant for some of the work that you need to cover. The third one is a bit longer, so it's more like 7 or 8 minutes long, and that includes interviews with the project manager of the Chilterns Chalk Stream project and a couple of the quite vocal and long-standing local activists, one on the River Chess and one on the River Ver, and it just covers some of the various threats that chalk streams face. So again, some of the things that we've covered this evening, but it's a nice summary, and it's a few different voices and a few kind of real people giving you their opinions. So again, it could be useful as an introduction or as the start of an activity. And it covers things like abstraction, water quality, invasive species, the kind of things that we've talked about this evening. So as I say, that they've been reasonably well watched, particularly the animation, but please do make use of them in the classroom if you can.
Perfect, thanks. I'm going to come out of the presentation if I can. Kerry might have put this into the chat for you. So this is the Observatory for the River Chess, the story maps that we have created. So you can look at the River Chess in terms of a kind of trip down the River Chess. So we've got 3 different journeys down the River Chess that talk about the relationship between groundwater and surface water, and talk about the issues on the Chess, and use data from the Environment Agency in terms of flow data and water quality data to kind of explain the River Chess. And embedded in this is also our water quality dashboard, which I'll come to in a minute. And also we have some sensors on the Chess, and the story map takes you through what we're actually measuring with these sensors as well. So that's very much the chemical side of things, and what things like temperature, dissolved oxygen mean, what electrical conductivity means. So these are also learning resources. In terms of looking at how these story maps sort of play out, and I hope you can see this as I scroll through, but essentially you scroll downwards, and we take you through what is a chalk stream. And there are various links to different explanations as well, and other resources. And there are maps that you can zoom in on. So as you go through the text, you'll zoom in on the Chilterns, and start to zoom in on the actual River Chess, so you can see where it flows from to. We have photographs. We talk about what a catchment is in a river system, the urban areas of the catchment. So it's essentially like doing a little mini field trip around the River Chess, and you can have a look then at what the types of ecology are for a chalk stream, things like the trout, that we've found osprey in the river. talking about it, the chess as a resource. We ran a series of questionnaires at local fetes and fairs a number of years ago and collected people's thoughts in association with the river chess as well, how it made them feel. And then we talk about the pressures on the chess as well. So we talk about public water supply, and we go into detail on river flows as well, with some nice videos of flowing street of the artesian wells in the chess. So where you can see water bubbling up, and the kinds of diagrams that I've shown you today as well are there. So that's I'm not going to go through all of that as a resource now, but that's for you to be able to explore, and we suggest that could be something to go through with students or allow students to explore in their own time to give them further information as well. So there's 3 of those individual story maps that you can work your way through. The first one is the general introduction. And then they get more detailed in terms of the level of knowledge and information as you move to 2 and 3. Number 4 is our kind of call for help for citizen scientists to work with us on the river chess. And then, as I say, later I'll go through water quality dashboard, etc. So to go back to the talk and just tell you a little bit more about our material. We've also got this inquiry-based learning scheme. So that's a kind of a scheme for teachers to think about what types of management issues they might want to talk about with students on the river chess. So the hydrology, for example, water flows. I'll go through that a little bit more in the next few slides. We've got a link to the water quality dashboard, so you can download data for the chess. I'll show you that in a moment. And we also got some educational posters as well. So just PDFs that you could print off, or PDFs that you could send as slides or use as slide decks, for example, if you're trying to highlight some of the critical issues in the chess or in other chalk streams or other rivers around the country. So in terms of why did we put this kind of material together? So that we could help students understand the challenges of managing water resources in the river chess, to allow a better understanding of the combination of different issues that surround water management, so the environmental issues, but also the political issues and the socio and economic issues as well. Because all of those obviously come into play. So we've tried to include material related to all of those different aspects, and to help students think perhaps about long-term solutions as to how to manage water quality in chalk streams. We've also provided you with data that you can download as Excel spreadsheets or CSV files, so that you could plot that. Students could get into drawing graphs. They could do A-level projects, for example, on this data, because we have data that's been collected at 15-minute intervals from our sensors going back to 2019 now. So there's a real wealth of data out there if the students want to use it. And the idea being that students could bring this information together to present reports and show evidence of being able to synthesize data to make value judgments about water resources management. So I've shown you the story map here. So that's a resource to explore. The idea of the inquiry-based learning material was to think about Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm sure you're all aware of, but that idea that you could move from students understanding, recognizing and recalling facts from this remember part of the Bloom's taxonomy up through helping them to understand what these facts mean, and to apply those facts and concepts and ideas to a real life situation, such as water management, water resources management in the chess. And then up to the higher parts of the Bloom's taxonomy, where they're analysing data and information, breaking it down into its component parts, judging the value of that material as well, so questioning that material, just not just taking it at face value, and then recombining it to make a new whole and new report. We've tried to include information that's at the bottom in this remember area. So for example, facts and figures like 77% of chalk streams being below a good standard of health in 2014. Things like the river chesses in the Chilterns, it's suffering for over abstraction. So you'll find sort of knowledge facts scattered through the material. And within the inquiry-based learning material, there is this schematic for teachers to think about what they might want to do with their students at different levels within that Bloom's taxonomy. So these are just ideas of why we've provided the material and what we think you could do with it, just to sort of spark ideas and to also signpost you through the material. We've signposted you to some of the slides that are available and where some of the material is. I just wanted to show you, for example, you can download flow data for the chest from the EA gauging station site that we showed you, and it's quite nice to look at long-term trends in data in these rivers, because you can really see drought periods, for example, and flooding periods. So you can see here in the chest that in the 1990s, between 1995 and 2000, there was an extended period of lower flows. So periods where the river was dry at times. And then you can also see times when we had much higher groundwater levels and higher flows as well, when we will have seen like these inputs from fine sediment, etc. So getting your students to understand that variability in flow, that whilst there is an annual pattern of sort of winter and summer, there are also longer term changes in these patterns that relate to longer term weather conditions. So, you know, 3 or 4 years of below average rainfall leads to eventually these lower patterns within the chest. So you can start to piece together the different parts of the sort of discharge puzzle, if you like, looking at these types of data sets. If your students don't like looking just at line graphs, there are things like heat maps as well. So this is an alternative way of showing flow data. You've got year on this bottom axis, and you've got month on the y-axis here, and the flow is color-coded essentially. So the darker red colours are periods of drought, and the green colours are periods of high flow within the river. So this is a much more visual way, I think, of grasping information about flow. It's essentially showing you the same information as the previous slide, but in a very different way from a kind of line plot, if you like. So there are lots of different ways of presenting this data, and you can access this through our sites as well. Just to give you a little bit more information on what we've been doing with water quality sensors, because this data is all available for you to download and to have a look at with the students if they wanted to do sort of A-level projects, for example, with the data sets. We've had 6 sensors in the River Chess, which we installed 4 of them first in 2019. They're connected to telemetry, so connected real time. You can look at the data from the sensors. They're for a number of different parameters, so different variables that are written here. They're continuously logging at 15-minute intervals. So you can look at, for example, the pH, the alkalinity and acidity of the river system and how that changes over time. You can look at temperature of the river water. You can look at the electrical conductivity, which is measuring the solutes in the water. And you can look at the oxygen concentration. Oxygen is really important because the fish need oxygen to breathe, the invertebrates need healthy oxygen conditions in the chalk stream. When we get, for example, sewage spills, those oxygen levels change in the River Chess. So there's lots of patterns that you can see, and you could get into the reasons for the changes in patterns over time and download that data. And for each of these water quality parameters, we have a sheet that you can download that tells you what they are and gives you example data as well to help students interpret the meaning of these different phrases, like what is pH, what is water quality, what is water temperature, for example. So I showed you in the story map, there's this dashboard. I can try and demonstrate that to you now. It's a bit slower, so we'll see whether it actually works at the moment. Again, I'll stop. This is what you do what you see when you come into the water quality data dashboard. You see a little bit of information about the project and a sort of welcome page that tells you what to do with the different icons here. There is live data, but you can also go into the time series. So what it does at first is it uploads all the data that's available for the chess and plots it as line graphs. So we're pulling in rainfall data from the Environment Agency. This plot here is just set up at the moment to show you electrical conductivity and temperature. So let's just take temperature, for example. So we can update the plot. You can click on and off the different measurements, and these will show graphs for you. You can also zoom in. So here you can see each color is a different water quality sensor at a different part of the river. So you've got a map to the left. So the color on the plot corresponds to the dot. So the furthest upstream sensor, which is upstream of the sewage treatment works, is red. And you can see as you move downstream, you've got different sensors here plotted in different colors. These two at sites 5 and 6, they were only added in 2022. So you can see some more colors here. And you can click on and off sites. So we can simplify this. Let's have site 1 and site 2 on, for example, and we can take off sites 4 and 5 just by clicking like that, so that you can simplify the data and zoom in on it. You can see the annual variation in water temperature here. You can see these two sites are near the sewage treatment works, and you can see that in the summer, the water temperature is hotter, and in the winter it's colder. And you can just zoom in on any data that you want, and it will redraw the plot for you. So quite nice for students then to be able to download that, because you can also go and download that data as well. So you can pick a date and choose the data from that time scan, and then you can update the plot. And you can also go to the download function and download any data that you want as well. So hopefully that's quite a flexible system that allows you to provide data for students to do various examples with. And then the live data is a live feed from 2 of our sensors, which I think is, it's working fairly fast at the moment. It gives you the rainfall and then plots the data as well. And again, you can click on and off the different water quality parameters. So I don't know if there's any questions in relation to that, but we put that out there for you guys to use as little or as much as you would like. But we'd hope that students can explore changes in water quality parameters in response to rainfall using this type of data set.
You're doing that, Kate, that I'll make the request at the end or after the workshop, but we obviously have a lot of data available to us. So the water quality sensors are providing us with a huge amount of data on a number of variables. One of my colleagues at the Chilterns Chalk Streams project is a citizen science officer, and she's working with quite a big team of volunteers who are mainly concentrated on the chess to run a number of different surveys, particularly around water quality, but on other things as well, ecological surveys and all sorts of things. So we're sitting on quite a lot of information. It would be really useful to us to have your thoughts on how we could present that so that it's useful for schools, because the raw data is big, and it's going to be a lot to process for students at Key Stage 4 and 5. But if you have ideas, or if you start to use this data, please let us know how you use it, because that can help to inform future resources that we might make.
Yeah, so we had ideas for picking out, for example, what I would call events. So plot restricted data. So give people examples, for example, of what happens when it rains very intensely in the catchment. What does the changes in water quality look like? And have some annotations on the graphs to explain that. So if that kind of material would be of use and interesting, do let us know, because that's the kind of next type of thing we're thinking about developing. This is just a plot of the river, but with you can see these 2 green dots here show 2 of the sensors, one above the sewage treatment works at Chesham and one down at Rickmansworth. I was just going to show you a little bit of temperature data that someone's plotted out here in Excel, just to show you the kinds of things you can start asking about the data. So this is just taking data from the 21st of June to the 28th of June, 2023. The blue line is upstream of the sewage treatment works. The red line is at Rickmansworth, so downstream of the sewage treatment works, the downstream end of the river. So you can start to obviously see, first of all, why is the data here so wavy? What's causing this, this cyclical pattern in temperature, which leads you to observe that those are happening on a daily basis. So this is a daily cycle. And you can think about how sunlight might be affecting water temperature in a chalk stream. So in a lot of the media information about chalk streams that we see at the moment, they tell us that chalk stream water temperatures are 10 degrees, which they're not. The aquifer itself is supplying water at about 10 degrees centigrade. But very quickly, when this water enters the stream, because there's sunlight falling on this stream, you get the water heating up. the water in these types of rivers, it tends to be fairly shallow. In the Chess, it's often areas of ankle deep water, for example. So there's lots of opportunity for heating up of the water surface. So that means that you tend to get this river heating up by day, cooling down at night. And then also we've got far warmer water by the time you've got down to Rickmansworth compared to upstream at Chesham. We have a lot of groundwater sources at Chesham and fewer at Rickmansworth as well. So you could also compare this to air temperature data, for example, and start to talk about these differences and why they exist. And then we've got the sewage treatment works as well, of course, that's contributing to this change in temperature. So through just taking snippets of the data and plotting it out, you can start looking at reasons for changes in these different parameters in the river. We've got explanations about other water quality variables like electrical conductivity and changes in oxygen as well. So different diagrams explaining why oxygen changes on different to different timescales. That's all in there as well for you to explore if you want to. Another interesting thing we found with these sensors was after snowy conditions, and this has literally just happened yesterday. This is data from last year, but if you went to our live data stream and looked at the last couple of days, you'd see this has happened again. This black line here is electrical conductivity. The blue line is temperature. This is just a screenshot of a graph. So sorry, I haven't sort of put the proper axes on it, but the blue line shows you that this is last year, 18th of December, temperature rose, air temperature rose, water temperature rose. And at that time, there was lots of snow around the roads. Road gritting had happened, and those road gritting salts got washed into the river with the snow melt and raised the electrical conductivity of the river. So sodium and chloride were entering the river system, and that was adding to the total amount of solutes in the river. So we saw a sharp peak in electrical conductivity when that happened, and that's happened again this year as well after our thaw in the last couple of days. So these are the kind of things you can look at with the data. And that allows you to move sort of to analysis of data as well. So from simple facts to doing exercises with analysis and then synthesis as well. Just wanted to explain to you a little bit about why we're in a water stressed environment. If you look at rainfall patterns in the UK, you can see that the west of the country here is coloured blue with high average annual rainfall in places of greater than 3,000 millimetres. But as you move across to the east of the country, there's a real rain shadow effect. And into the east, we see much lower annual rainfall totals of sort of 600 to 700 millimetres of rainfall per year. And London actually receives less rainfall than Rome, Istanbul and Dallas, and half as much as Sydney in Australia. So we are in a water-stressed region. And of course, with climate change, that rain is falling in ever more intense periods of time as well. So our patterns of rainfall as well as our totals are changing. So that's why there's quite an emphasis for these chalk streams on water resources issues as well. It's not just the over abstraction, it's also patterns of rainfall, dry and wet years of rainfall. This is the type of stimulus material, so small sort of snippets of information we've provided for students to get them talking about the data that's out there. So this, for example, is looking at average water use in the region, in the Thames, as compared to Anglian region and Southern region in the UK. Affinity is also a local water company. And you can see here that by comparison, on average, the people in Denmark use 80 litres of water per person per day. In the Thames region, we used 154 in litres per person per day, 2012 to 2013, 146, 2016 to 2017. We're an area of the UK that uses a lot of water in our homes. So that could be a kind of discussion point with students. We've got information for you about how water usage in the home breaks down into the different components as well. And there's this handy sort of diagram about how do different water habits add up to total usage water. And I think it's quite compelling sort of discussion to have. There's 8.8 million customers in the Thames region, and they use on average, as of 2022, about 157 litres of water a day, and that's higher than the national average of 130 litres of water a day. Compare it with a place like Denmark, where people are using 80 litres of water per day. So why do we use so much water in this area? And then think about the fact that 80% of this water supply comes from rivers, 20% comes from groundwater, and that the amount we use does affect the flow in our rivers. So you could be asking the students questions like, what could you do to save water? Should you be trying to save water? Or why should we try to save water? So what are their thoughts on this? So that's what we mean by evidence-based materials. Provide them with this information and then start working through some questions with them. We've also got a stimulus sheet about low flows in the River Chess with some photos of the same site in a drought year and in a high flow year, and some quotes as well from other organisations talking about the levels of water in the Chilterns to try and get discussion about chalk streams and differences in water level from year to year. And then bottom here is a quote about warm years in the UK and climate change as well, again, to try and just stimulate some discussion around climate change. The idea with this evidence-based material is that you're posing questions to the students, posing a starting question, agree a starting question, and then get them to pose a load of questions around that. So we did this with some of the students in their first year at Queen Mary, asked whether the River Chess is disappearing from some of the information that they had on the web, and then got them to sort of start to think about questions that go with that and the kind of facts that they could use to interrogate that a bit further. So they were asking questions like, are the low flows that they were seeing on the hydrograph natural? Were the low flows man-made? And what was the balance of evidence for one or the other? How did the changes in the water flows affect the river health? So what's the ecological impacts? Is the situation getting worse? Wanted to know, like, what does the future hold in terms of climate change, in terms of increasing demand for water, and how could things be improved? So leading to what were their ideas for sustainable water management plans. And we asked them to wrap that up in a report that set out the issues for the Chess now and into the future, and suggest to us some ways that they could see that things might improve. What would they do if they were a river officer working in the Chess at the moment? How would they be trying to get people working together to improve the flows in the River Chess? So those are the types of exercises you could think about working through. The material that we've created in the module plan, we've tried to divide into themes for you. So hydrology and chalk catchments, river health, so looking at the ecology of the river, the human interactions in the River Chess, in the drainage basin, how can we manage water demand, and creating sustainable water futures as well. So if you want to look at that material, it is subdivided into different topics with suggestions as to how you might want to use the material. And I just wanted to end with a slide looking at future pressures on the catchment and climate change scenarios. So this is an infographic from the Met Office and from UK SIP, which is essentially saying what we might expect to happen in terms of temperature and in terms of changes in rainfall pattern into the future. And I think it's quite a useful resource for starting to ask questions about what might happen in the Chess catchment. So the idea here is it sets different scenarios as you move higher in temperature. So if we move to sort of a +4 degree rise in temperature, obviously we're getting extremely hot days where temperatures exceed 25 degrees are likely to become much more frequent. You could relate this back to water temperatures in the Chess. So we've got some information on the fact that if temperatures in rivers exceed 20 degrees, that's really important for species like trout. So fish like trout, for example, would have a real problem as water temperatures exceed 20 degrees. And we're starting to see that on our sensors. So you can see during the times where we've measured water temperature in some sites during hot summers, our temperatures are exceeding 20 degrees. So more hot weather days are going to cause problems for shallow chalk streams. And then we'll see fewer cold days where there's very cold conditions. And as we might be noticing, we'll see increased number of days of intense and prolonged heavy rainfall as well. So heavy rainfall in relation to chalk streams, you could think about what does that mean for fine sediment moving into the river? So we get a lot of runoff, a lot of agricultural runoff and road runoff from heavy rainfall, displacing soil and moving that into the river system. So that could be a point of discussion. And of course, less frequent rainfall will increase the occurrence of severe droughts. That's going to change groundwater levels. We're already seeing evidence of that in the Chilterns. So again, that's affecting potentially flows in a river. So making that link between climate change scenarios and what we might hypothesize is going to happen to a chalk stream as a result could be a kind of useful exercise to go through. This is quite a nice resource that I've found as well on the BBC. You can ask it, what will climate change look like near me? You can put in your postcode and they give you various different scenarios for your area in terms of changes in temperature and changes in rainfall pattern as well. So I think that was my final slide.